All right, Dr. Chris, welcome back to the Biohacker Babes. Thanks for joining us for part two.
Yeah, absolutely, y'all. Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, you are the most fun researcher to talk to. So, such a blast having you on last time that we had to get you back on because we want to see what's new in the world of fasting and your amazing product, Mimio. So, we are going to do our best to share a lot of new information. We might touch on some of the things we talked about last time, but for anyone that missed that episode, it is episode 234. It was about a year and a half ago. So if you're like, wait, I want to hear more about that, you guys didn't talk about it enough today, go back. It's probably in that episode. So we'll link to that below. But to jump off with something that probably most people are not familiar with, what is a biomimetic? Because you say Mimio is the first fasting mimetic, but what is a biomimetic? What does that even mean?
Yeah, great question. So, a biomimetic is very similar to what it sounds like, right? It's mimicking biology, which also is where Mimio itself, as a company name, comes from, mimicking biology. So, this goes at our underlying approach of actually looking at what's happening in the human body in these very interesting regenerative states that we already have. So something like, fasting is a great example. Exercise is another one, or maybe sleep even, and kind of teasing out the molecular pathways that underscore all these beneficial effects that happen during those states, and then finding a way to recreate it. So this biomimetic approach that we are taking is essentially trying to take what the body would naturally do to heal itself, to regenerate its cells, to activate these kind of built-in cellular defense, repair, longevity pathways, and then just putting that into a capsule that we can take that recreate those benefits on demand.
Very
Very
cool.
cool. Yeah.
I feel like maybe an uninformed or a short form response from someone listening would be to say, well, that sounds like you are cutting corners, that we're kind of missing out on the hard work of being a human and getting these health benefits. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that we consider this kind of to be like the ultimate biohack. So I don't disagree that it's kind of cheating, but humans are want to cheat, right? Like this is the major thing. One of the
Sure.
reasons why I liked doing this research, and one of the main reasons why I started it in the first place was because I did that, hardcore fasting lifestyle. So when I first really got into the fasting research, I thought it was so cool that you could do a fast and then immediately see these great benefits on your body. I was in an immunology lab at the time and started fasting and then taking my own cells, taking my own blood, looking at it under, a microscope, doing all these interesting immunological techniques to see how cellular functionality was altered by fasting. And it was really profound. My cells became more functional in basically every area. They had better survivability. They were less prone to autoreactive immune stimuli, so like less inflammatory. They had better like oxidative stress defenses. They had better cellular protection mechanisms. So it was really interesting because I was a young 23-year-old at the time and going from a normal person to a super person just after a 36-hour fast. So I started doing alternate day fasting to really get those benefits, but it's such a hard lifestyle to do, right? And if you do alternate day fasting, that's where you see in the scientific evidence where you get like the best lifespan extension. But society is not set up for a human being to do that at this point. So really, Mimeo kind of came from this kind of like anger that I had inside me, where it's like I really want these benefits because they're so cool, but it's just not a really feasible long-term lifestyle. So there must be a way that I can use my science brain to figure this out, recreate it, get those benefits, and then, not have to sacrifice quality of life for length of life.
Mm.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah.
being the guinea pig and also making the solution to the problem. That is, I mean, I have clients that
Yeah.
love fasting, and then I have so many that are like, I'm never going to open that door. The idea of it, heck no. No
That's
way.
totally fair. And I'm
Yeah.
I'm still on that boat. I still love fasting. I think that it really fits into my lifestyle. So even now with Mimio, I do one meal a day fasting. But the Mimio just kind of really serves as a fasting enhancer for me. So I'll take it first thing in the morning with my green tea. Really helps to like wake me up, provides these appetite suppression effects. It's kind of clean all day energy that really allows me to focus and dial in to what I'm doing. I'll work out in a fasted state and then come home and kind of have this, big reward cheat meal almost at the end of the day. So I just really like being able to live that way and eat that way. It feels like, it seems very restrictive when you say it out loud, but for me, it's actually very freeing because that one meal that you get at the end of the day, it's like I can just do anything and it's all going to be
Mm.
fine.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it works for you. You've found out what works. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the key, right? In biohacking, it's like what is going to work for your body. And so I'm on the other end. I don't do well with extended fasts. Like I do really well with 2 or 3 meals a day. I would say 2 meals more so when I'm like traveling. It's just easier to have 2 big meals. But when I'm home, I have 3 meals. And I tried to do extended fasting many, many years ago, and I kind of jacked up my hormones.
Yeah.
I was in my mid 20s and I didn't really know what I was doing, and I definitely messed up my hormones at the time. So, which I think is a really good point. Like some people just maybe it's not the right time in their life to be fasting. And I would say one is maybe women that are cycling, especially if they're trying to get pregnant, probably not the best time to be fasting. And then
Yeah.
the other population I would say is like the elderly population. We've been talking about this a lot on the show lately, like how important it is to have strong muscle, strong bones as we get into our older years so that we can prevent falls, fractures, things like that. But for that population, they are really struggling to get enough protein in. So if you
Yep.
try and say, like, okay, you need to hit this protein target, oh, but I also want you to be fasting every other day, they're going to be like, how am I going to do that? So what would you say to that? Like those two populations for Mimio being a really great option. And then is there anyone else where it could come into play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great solution for the older population. And it is very true because those are the people who could really benefit the most from these cellular restorative regenerative effects of fasting. But yeah, are very much also contraindicated because frailty, sarcopenia, bone wasting, all that kind of stuff is something that you really, really want to avoid in later life. And if anything, it's kind of the point in your life where you really want to be active about putting on muscle and building strength whenever you can to just kind of prevent that decline. So Mimio really slots in great for that population. And in terms of other populations too, you could, if you have some kind of like metabolic condition, right, where fasting might be dangerous for you, like diabetes is a really good example. Mimio can also be really helpful in those situations to just kind of, help give you, again, those cellular regenerative benefits where fasting might be difficult, especially in terms of, putting a load on blood sugar.
Mm,
Mm,
okay.
I like that. I'm just
Yeah.
so curious because I talk to clients about fasting and feasting, sort of like these ancestral practices that would mimic how we had access to food in any given week or month. And if we do the fasting, we want to typically balance with the feasting because there's sort of this catabolic, anabolic. I always like think
Mhm.
of a seesaw, right? The seesaw is going to keep going back and forth. We're going to
Yeah.
have that flexibility. If we're using Mimio to mimic the fasting, what do we do with the feasting? Do we get rid of it completely? Do we have this? Because I always think of them as like a yin yang,
Yeah.
right? The fasting makes the feasting work better. The feasting makes the fasting work better. What do we
Hmm.
do with this other component now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to think about it as a seesaw, and that's usually when I explain it how I what I do with my hands too. So it makes perfect sense. But yeah,
It's a little dance move.
All right, watch us on YouTube.
I know, yeah. In the Western world, we are constantly inundated with, food messaging, right? Especially this whole like, oh, you got to eat like 3 meals a day plus snacks. Like if you ever experience any hunger, that's really bad for you, right? You shouldn't be doing that. Your body's literally like eating itself. And I was fed that narrative, my entire childhood, right? So I believed it. So
Same.
yeah, like
Yeah.
the first time that I fasted, I legitimately thought like, wow, like am I going to die? I told my parents that I was doing it, and I'm like, they were like, okay, like we'll be on call, like, don't do anything crazy,
Oh
right?
my God.
Oh, wow.
And so, like when you break through that barrier, you kind of get to this place on the other side where it's like, oh, I went like 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, 60 hours without food, and I didn't die. It was very empowering. I was like, oh, I must be a superhero. I'm amazing. I can do anything at this point. And that, like, switching that relationship around with food was really great for me, just to kind of be like, oh, like if there's something there that like I don't want to eat, but it's like unhealthy, like someone brought pizza into the office, whatever, we can kind of be more in the vein of just like, oh, I don't have to eat if I don't want to. Like, I don't have to do that. I don't have to do this. It gave me a bit more, control because I was like, I can go 60 hours without eating and it'll be totally fine.
Freedom. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, food
freedom.
freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the big thing for me. So with that messaging of, the 3 meals a day plus snacks, we're kind of constantly in this fed state, right? Because biologically speaking, it takes around 4 to 6 hours after a meal for your body to really, return back to its original homeostasis, right? So we kind of get this curve of you eat a meal about an hour afterwards is kind of, or like, half an hour to an hour afterwards, kind of like when everything starts hitting the system, your body switches over from this homeostatic maintenance and kind of repair state that it's in into, I've got all those nutrients coming in. I got to figure out where they're going to go in the body or else I'll die, right? My glucose will go too high or my cholesterol, my lipids will go too high and my body will stop functioning. So it's very much like a, deal with it or die kind of scenario. And that's, as you can imagine, a deal with or die situation is not great for your body feeling like relaxed and in maintenance mode and repairing itself, right? It's very much like, like very frenzied. Then you've got all these foreign molecules that are coming in from the food that are also setting off, like dietary inflammation and whatever other contributors you're having that are coming in from the bioactives and the polyphenols that are coming in from the food. So it's very chaotic. And then a 3 meal a day plus snack schedule, you're kind of never getting out of that postprandial state. So you're always putting your body in this state of that metabolic chaos. And what Mimio is doing in that context is, we have a lot of stimulation of these pro-fed pathways, which are also the ones that are very associated with pro-aging that are kind of being constantly overstimulated. Mimio is then going to come in and activate these anti-aging, like pro-fasting pathways at the same time to kind of help give you more of that cellular homeostasis that you otherwise wouldn't experience without this longer term fasting.
So
Mm,
you're arguing
yeah.
most people are already fed enough so they don't need the feasting. But I don't know if that's, I mean, definitely in general, our culture, our society is overfed. But I get clients that get really into the fasting. I'm like, maybe you don't do that too much.
Right. Yeah. Everything is
Yeah.
definitely about balance, right? Like even, when you look at the scientific data, kind of like we talked about before, where you see the best lifespan extension in animal models is this alternate day fasting regimen, right? Where it's like 1 day of fasting, 1 day of normal eating, 1 day of fasting, 1 day of normal eating, rinse and repeat for the
Mm.
entire organism's life. And so that kind of cycling is very important, especially to avoid things like the muscle wasting and the bone wasting and these problems that can pop up, especially with long-term caloric restriction. And I think that that's like a really
Mm,
interesting distinction that does pop up in the science of like caloric restriction and fasting have very distinct effects within the body. There's definitely some overlap, but they also have their own unique things that they are doing because fasting in and of itself doesn't actually require long-term energy restriction. Because if you're eating, say, double calories on your eating day and then no calories on your fasting day, ultimately you're still eating the same amount of calories, but you can still see these cellular health benefits and this lifespan extension that happens there.
Okay.
mm. Okay. That was going to be my next question. So rather than just focusing on caloric restriction all the time, the alternate day fasting would be the better way to go for longevity. Am
Yeah,
I
there
understanding that correctly?
Yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made for that. And we didn't
Okay.
know this for a very long time. We thought, that fasting was related to at least the energy restriction benefits that were happening with long-term caloric restriction. So we kind of like conflated that data for a really long time. There was a really seminal paper that was, released in Nature. I want to say maybe 5 to 7 years ago at this point that basically showed that you could still get the lifespan extension effects of fasting, even when controlling for calories, even when there was no caloric restriction, you still got lifespan extension, health span extension benefits
Mm.
just from the alternate day fasting. And that was really, really fascinating to see because some problems that we know of with long-term caloric restriction is that you're much higher prone to sarcopenia. You have much higher problems just like maintaining muscle mass. You have a lot of problems with bone wasting as well because you usually end up pulling from the calcium stores to help buffer the higher acidic blood because of the ketosis that's happening. So yeah, it's a really interesting
Wow.
balance.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That's wild. Another question about with Mimio, are you seeing a difference in like, say a group that's fasting and then they're adding Mimio in versus not fasting at all and taking Mimio? Is there a greater benefit in
Yeah,
either group?
I think it's really different strokes for different folks for that one. So what we've done three different clinical studies on Mimio so far. And in each of those, the participants were just eating normally. So we've never done a study with Mimio where we've had people fasting and taking Mimio at the same time. We were always very much like we want it to be a mimetic product so you can get
Mm.
these same benefits, but without actually having to do any kind of fasting. But from a
Okay.
biological perspective, there's definitely some advantages to being able to take Mimio in a fasted state and not a fed state. Kind of like what we were talking about before. When you take Mimio in a fed state, you have this very high stimulation of the pro-feeding, pro-growth, pro-aging pathways that you're then kind of counterbalancing with the activation and the promotion of the fasting pathways. So you're taking, let's say a negative stimulus and then, kind of counterbalancing that, getting back to homeostasis. Whereas if you're taking Mimio in a fasting state, there's nothing for it to counterbalance. So it's really just promoting to a higher degree those fasting anti-aging pathways that we were talking about.
That's
Okay.
cool. Okay,
Yeah,
so
that
we
makes
can
sense.
opt in at a different level depending on how we feel about the fasting.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
exactly.
I think there's like other, mental, emotional benefits of fasting too, or just feeling empowered, or like you said, it's hard to fit fasting into our everyday lives and society. But when I work with clients, I always recommend, for example, fasting when you're traveling, because I would rather you fast and get that opportunity to fast than to eat the shit food at the airport and on
Oh
the
yeah.
airplane.
Hmm.
Right. So in some ways, it's like, well, this is probably the better choice. But I like that we can do it with or without and really just meet the person where they're at
Yeah,
and maybe
absolutely.
have the compounded benefits.
Yeah, and it's very flexible that way. And that's the cool part because we designed Mimeo to mimic the effects of a 36-hour fast. So if you're doing fasts that are shorter than 36 hours, even then, these molecules are not going to be very highly produced in the body. So those shorter
Yeah.
term fasts can really be enhanced by taking Mimeo because it's going to just kind of jumpstart your fasting benefits, get you to what your body will recognize more as like a deeper state of fasting in a much shorter fasting window and give you, more benefits than you might otherwise achieve.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah, I
So
love that.
I'm for anyone that didn't hear the previous interview, I'm sure they're like, what the heck is in this stuff? Can you talk about the main ingredients? So we have like the NAD precursors, spermidine, and then we have I think it's the palmitic acid, and I'm forgetting the other one. Can you explain
OEA.
what they are and what they
Yeah,
do?
yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
OEA.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to kind of like take it like way back to the beginning, the way we designed Mimeo was by looking at what happens in the human body during a 36-hour fast. So we had 20 people come in, 10 men, 10 women, and did a before and after baseline overnight fasted state and a 36-hour fasted state and looked at the differences there. And what we found was that just like with me, when I initially tried it, we saw that they're all very functionally enhanced in their cellular functionalities. So their cells were more anti-inflammatory, more antioxidant, more cardioprotective, which is really cool in the nutrition space because that just never happens, right? You never have a one-day intervention that takes already young, healthy people and turns them into super people. So we were very curious as to what the differences between the two states were that could be causing these beneficial effects. So we did what's called comprehensive metabolomics, basically looking at all of the small molecule components of the plasma. And what we found was that during a 36-hour fast, there's this unique set of molecules that are produced by the body that were really only elevated during a fast. When we screened through those molecules, we were able to find this synergistic combination of four of them that could recreate a lot of these fasting-like benefits, but just through supplementation. So we could recreate those anti-inflammatory effects, those antioxidant effects, those cardioprotective effects, and then even extend the lifespan in model organisms by 96% just through supplementation with these four molecules. And so those molecules are what make up Mimio: nicotinamide, spermidine, palmitoyl ethanolamide, and oleoyl ethanolamide. And those together are basically just recreating fasting at a molecular level, activating these same pathways that you would ordinarily activate during fasting, but just through supplementation. So yeah, nicotinamide itself is kind of our NAD precursor, helps to activate the NAD SERT pathways, right, and promote NAD concentrations within cells, which is really important because NAD is more or less how your cells sense their energy state. So if you have a bunch of NAD plus within a cell, that's basically going to be sending signals within the cell that says we don't have a lot of energy. Let's activate a lot of these like fasting like pathways and change around DNA methylation, DNA expression levels to kind of match a fasting state. So the increase in NAD plus helps really put that cell more in a biochemical fasting state that then makes it easier for all the other molecules in the formulation to then do their job. So spermidine, next one up, really promotes autophagy. That's what it's really well known for, has great cognitive enhancement effects. The palmitoyl ethanolamide is part of the endocannabinoid system, stimulates through CB1, CB2 receptors. So kind of like your body's natural CBD. It has mood and cognition enhancement effects, but also anti-inflammatory and pain relief effects. And then you have the oleoyl ethanolamide, OEA, that's in there as well. And that's actually part of the gut-brain axis where it helps to stimulate satiety, suppress appetite. It's also a PPAR alpha activator, so really helping to promote lipid oxidation, so fat metabolism and breakdown as like the primary cellular fuel source rather than glucose.
So
Love how
cool.
simple it is.
Ah,
Four ingredients.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really fun to screen through all of them. Although we haven't done the full back end work of that yet. So what we found was that there were over 300 metabolites that were really highly upregulated during a fast. And of those, around 2 dozen or so already had some kind of literature evidence, scientific evidence of like, yeah, these ones are bioactive. They can actually produce X, Y, and Z cellular benefits, whether that was the anti-inflammatory effects, the antioxidant effects, autophagy, what have you. And from those, that's where we kind of started tinkering, seeing which ones could really activate these cellular health benefits, and then which ones were okay but didn't work in with the synergistic formulation. And so what we ended up with was, yeah, just those four. And because they have these synergistic benefits, you get these really outsized effects that you wouldn't just get from one thing or two things or three things together.
Mm.
We did the actual lifespan extension analysis. We found that, they could all extend lifespan to a certain degree, whether that was, 5%, 10%, about to like up to around like 30%. But that when we put them all together, that's when we saw this 96% lifespan extension. And I think that that's the real power of this biomimetic approach, right? We are literally just using evolution as kind of this scientific cheat code to jumpstart our research capabilities and find these synergies between molecules that not only work within the human body because they're part of the human body, but were designed to work together over, thousands and thousands of years of evolution to activate this very specific survival and longevity program that you get with fasting.
Yeah. I mean, you're taking the magic of the human body and just finding, like we said at the beginning, like a shortcut or a biohack. I don't think that that's a bad thing. It's like you're taking this amazing machine we already have. Like, why not tap into that and make things easier for us? So I'm curious with the biological age side of things or the lifespan. Was that just with the C. elegans or was that in human biological age testing or
Yeah,
both?
so we've done both. So initially
Okay.
we were doing with the C. elegans, that's where we saw the 96% lifespan extension. And then after we did our pilot study, basically making sure that when you take Mimio, all of the ingredients themselves are bioavailable and they can produce these fasting-like benefits even when people are eating. We then did a case study analysis of 8 weeks of supplementation in partnership with Mount Sinai. And what we found there was that, when you had 8 weeks worth of supplementation with the Mimeo formulation, not changing anything else, not changing diet, not changing lifestyle at all, we could get a 2.5 year reduction in biological age in humans. That we were using the DNA methylation tests for that, so the epigenetic clocks.
Wow.
That's
Nice.
significant.
It's significant. It's really, really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, because that
Yeah,
test is
for
a hard one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very hard to move the methylation markers around, especially in
Yeah.
the short term, right? Like an 8 week
Yeah.
turnaround time. We were just kind of testing just to see, and we're really happy with the results that we got.
Yeah, because I've
wow.
heard sometimes like they don't even recommend you do that test less than 6 months because they're like,
Right.
you might not see a change in under 6 months. So in 8 weeks,
Yeah, it's
that's
pretty
wild.
impressive. Yeah, and I would say like the biological age tests are very much like, you shouldn't weigh yourself every day, right? Like,
Yeah.
do it like once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever, right? Because the day-to-day fluctuations that are going to happen within, that test are going to be very different. And so yeah, like something like, a 6 month time course or a 1 year time course is probably going to be more helpful to an average person than being like, let me test it every day.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But man, 8 weeks is short that and such a small commitment that you're asking,
Yeah,
really.
exactly. And the cool thing is that we've also now done our latest randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, which was also an 8 week time course and saw some really, really great benefits there as well.
Tell us more.
Yeah, the
Tell us
teaser.
more. That was going to be my next question. You just walked right in. Go
Yeah.
for it.
So
Yeah.
the cool effects there. This was in an older population of age 50 plus, and again, equal proportion of men and women. That's always like very important to us in our scientific foundational stuff because we just don't do enough scientific research in women, and that's like I come from the UC Davis nutrition department, which is very unique because it's I think 90% women. So we kind of really
Mm.
drill in as part of
Wow.
our education, like this is a problem in the scientific research community, and you're not allowed to sidestep it. So we get that
Thank
benefit
you.
of having to have like the universal research, and I've definitely taken that to heart with mine as well, because I'm like, yeah, I want it to work for everybody.
Hmm.
Thank you.
And so
Yeah.
what we saw there was just 8 weeks of supplementation, no change in diet, no change in lifestyle, and people got really, really great appetite suppression scores. They had like self-reported better hunger control, more satiety, so they were getting fuller faster, staying fuller longer. They had much better control over eating only when hungry, so they were kind of really able to dial in their cravings. They were less distracted from cravings throughout the day. So these really powerful effects on that hunger control and improved satiety aspect that you would get from the OEA in the formulation, but is being supported by all these other molecules. And then we also saw really powerful effects on actual metabolic markers themselves. So we were able to significantly improve fasting glucose levels. We were able to significantly improve a lot of different areas of cholesterol metabolism. So decreasing total cholesterol levels, decreasing LDL cholesterol levels, the bad cholesterol levels. And then decreasing cellular stress levels as well, as measured through oxidative LDL. So a lot of these, same benefits that you would be getting from fasting, these, hunger suppression effects, these metabolic enhancement effects. We also had decreased abdominal pain and bloating on Mimio, so kind of these, helpful digestive effects as well. And we were really, really excited about that because we're just like there it is in black and white, like the benefits of fasting without actually having to fast.
That's
And
awesome.
you've just mentioned a bunch of benefits that people take GLP-1s for.
Ah,
But
Oh,
then like there's
yeah.
disadvantages of GLP-1s, right? Like how do you come off of it? How long do you do it? People like lose appetite completely. So then we're missing the signaling and the nutrients for muscle protein synthesis, maybe harming digestion. You kind of just covered all of those categories.
yeah.
Could this be a new GLP-1?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely something that can be a great alternative to GLP-1. I think it's something that can be, a more natural way to do it, especially if people want to come off the product. And we actually do have a lot of clinician partners that we work with around the country at these longevity clinics who use Mimeo exactly for that purpose of helping to wean people off of the GLP-1 drugs because that's something that is typically not addressed in GLP-1 care is when you're done losing the weight that you want to lose, how do you actually safely and effectively get off of it? Because you do have these kind of massive hunger withdrawals that happen when you come off the GLP-1s. And there's like, a weaning protocol that you can do. But what we find with the studies that have been done is that the majority of people who come off the GLP-1s end up regaining, two-thirds of the weight that they lost throughout the process in just, under a year after coming off of the drugs. So there's really this need for something that can kind of help people to transition to a more natural alternative that's much more like number one, affordable than the GLP-1 drugs, and then also a lot safer in the long term because again, these are like natural human molecules that we're using. So your body inherently knows how to take them up, how to utilize them, how to metabolize them without any side effects, unlike what happens with the GLP-1s.
That's
Yeah.
very exciting.
Yeah, very, very exciting.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, because it's so popular right now. And I think there is a lot of benefit for people to finally experience a day where they're not just thinking about being hungry and thinking about food all day. And I see that with GLP-1s. Like people feel free for the first time ever. They're like, I'm finally not thinking about food 24/7.
Mhm.
But if they could take this and experience that, feeling satisfied after a meal, not feeling hungry all the time, then people can make healthier choices and then maybe they can keep the weight off long term. But
Yeah,
that's got
exactly.
to be hard if you're just thinking about food all day long. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
really
that's
hard.
why they call it food noise, right? And
Mhm.
I totally get that. It very much is kind of like, a slider bar almost where it's just like the that and this happened with me with fasting too, right? I wouldn't necessarily call it like hunger in the traditional sense, but when I get to, like 24 hours worth of fasting, I become very aware of food, right? I'm just like
Yeah.
okay, let me just like go online real quick and like look at Yelp and like maybe do some like restaurant pictures. Let me look at some pictures of food, food, right? Just like, what am I gonna eat tomorrow, right? So like my brain would just kind of like naturally go there. I wouldn't be physically hungry, but I would be like
Yeah.
mentally hungry almost. And I feel like that's
Yeah.
what people are kind of experiencing on this day-to-day basis, and that's why the GLP-1s can be such a powerful thing where if you can get rid of that, like distractions from craving, that food noise, that like, and improve that kind of like eating only when hungry feeling for people, then that's really, really powerful, not just from a, weight loss and metabolic health perspective, although Mimio can do that too. But from just a quality of life perspective of, yes, I am free now, like you said, Renee.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
rather than having the band-aid. I mean, these things do work, but there's just a lot of fallout afterwards.
Right. And I think that that really comes down to a lack of holistic care that comes with the GLP-1s too, right? It's like, oh, well, I put you on the drug. What more could you possibly want? Where really doctors have to, yes, get people on the drugs, give them that, freedom and clarity of mind, but then also teach them how to sustain that in the long term, use that as a way to help get people on better eating habits, better exercise habits, these lifestyle changes. Although I also realize, as I say it out loud, it's very antithetical to like the American experience, right? Where it's like, well, I'm already on the drug. Why do I have to change anything else, right?
Oh my gosh. I know across the board, there's
Yeah,
lack of
yeah.
education around like, what are the root causes? What else can I do lifestyle nutrition wise to support my goals? We just give the solution. And for my clients that have been put on GLP-1s, there's none of them have ever had a conversation with their doctor about what to do to support it and what happens next. It's just, there you go. Good
Yeah.
luck. Have a nice life.
Yeah,
And they're all like, what next? Nobody knows.
yep. And
That's
that's really
wild.
hard because doctors themselves usually do not get any kind of robust nutrition in like education, right? Like I'm trying to remember the actual statistic, but I think doctors within their entire residency maybe spend 1 or 2 hours actually getting any kind of nutrition education,
Right.
right?
I think it's like 4 credits
Yeah, exactly.
total.
And
Total.
I'm just out here kind of like, oh, I spent 7 years learning about nutrition, but nobody comes knocking on my door to ask me, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So wild.
And you probably feel like there's still more to learn
Oh,
after
absolutely.
7 years.
Yeah, after 7 years of research, I was the black sheep of the nutrition department because everybody else was very much like, what do we eat to make ourselves healthy? Like, how many strawberries, how many blueberries, how many, stalks of celery should we be eating to like get all the things we need? And I was over here like, what if we just didn't eat at all?
Ooh,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, so exactly. Like it was like, even that question in the nutrition department was very rare, right? Just kind of, we haven't looked at every aspect of nutrition from all angles. There's still so much to learn. There's still so much to grow from. There's still so much that we don't know, even about the things that we think that we do know of, right? I think fasting's a perfect example where very traditionally, very historically, fasting was always part of the human experience. That then, as we kind of, modernized, industrialized, we very much lost, right? We got that like no one should ever be hungry. It's associated with famine and it's associated with poverty. And, like if you have money, you should eat. And then we see kind of like the cascades of how that ends up impacting human health in this modernized society because we kind of forgot about, oh, we're actually supposed to experience these periods of fasting, and it's very like much part of our evolutionary, development and our DNA to be able to do these things, and it's actually pretty beneficial when it happens. So I think that losing that information and kind of like rediscovering it again and putting it more from like a more like spiritual, like religious or even just natural thing that would happen, and then applying rigorous science to it and figuring out, oh, there's actually a lot of cool underlying biochemistry that's going on is just it fascinates me and it still does, to this day. There's so much more to learn.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
more people need to know that. Like, why would we do this or what is happening in the body? Because if we have the education, then we're more likely to be motivated to do something like that.
Yeah,
So, like a
absolutely.
lot of people that fast do, as you said, do it for spiritual, religious reasons, but they're still not really clued into the biochemistry of that. And I think that's naturally motivating to know that, like, I get cellular repair, or for my clients that actually can't put on weight, that fasting could help them do that just by kind of cleaning out damaged cells and repairing the mitochondria, right? That's like,
Yeah.
it's underground information that could be so helpful so that we have a lifelong nutrition plan that works for us, for the bio individual.
There was nothing more motivating for me than being able to, okay, like look at my own before and afters, right? I'm going to do a 36-hour, 48-hour, 60-hour fast, and I'm going to track my blood, my cells the whole way through, and I'm going to look at it under the microscope myself, and I'm going to see all these changes. And when you do that, like that's just so cool. And like almost, like, I don't want to say addictive because that's like too strong of a term, but I was
Well,
very
I
much,
would get addicted.
yeah, like I was, yeah, and
It's
then I
like the
was.
ultimate biohack. Oh my gosh, it's so
Yeah,
cool.
exactly. I was definitely addicted. I was just like, I can actually see my cells like change function like to something that I did. It just, again, like that very empowering experience of like I did something and there was a change. Like I can control what my cells are doing and make them better. That was just really, really cool to see. But it's also a very rarefied experience, right? Like you just don't get that in day-to-day life. So I'm very lucky to have been able to actually experience that.
Oh, that is so
Yeah.
cool. You're
Yeah.
so lucky because if everyone could do that just once, it just would change health and nutrition.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
we kind of get like
Yeah.
this small opportunity to do that, I think, with glucose monitors,
Hmm.
particularly with
Mhm.
fasting. I love when people start looking at their glucose when they start extending their fasting window and they think, oh, like you said before, I'm going to die if I don't eat or I get hungry. And then they look at their glucose and it's totally stable, getting
Yep.
that feedback to go like, I'm okay. Oh, good stuff is actually happening.
Yeah, I actually really
Yeah.
like to, when people who complain a lot about being like I'm hyper or I'm hypoglycemic and they like put a glucose monitor on and they get to actually see the data. It's like, oh, I guess I'm not.
Yeah, we tell
Yeah.
ourselves these stories. It's just wild how out of control it can get.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's like, and as we kind of like stack more data points together, I'm really curious to see what happens both to like the biohacking movement in and of itself, but also just the mainstream population, right? Because I think that CGMs have been very popular in the biohacking space, for a pretty long time at this point, but are just now starting to kind of like eke their way into more of the mainstream. And when
Mhm.
we start like stacking all of this data on top of each other, and then you have companies like Function Health, right, that are giving you hundreds of biomarkers to kind of sift through. Is that going to be really informative for us in terms of like, wow, I can really take control of my health? Is it going to be way too confusing for anybody to actually like make actionable decisions on where it's like, oh, okay, I was really trying to like alter my like LDL levels and my glucose levels, so I did this, but then that made my HDL levels do this, and like my, I don't know, my copper levels or like my ABA1C levels like do something else, right? So it's kind of this really interesting, biological stacking tool, and I wonder if we're gonna really know or if we're gonna get caught in the weeds.
Yeah.
I think with where like AI is headed with
Mhm.
health, I think if it can keep up the pace with the massive rise in data collection, I think it will balance out, right? If like your average Joe isn't having to actually look at all the data points and like and analyze it, if we can just run it through an AI algorithm that says, this is all you need to know, this is what you need to do,
Yeah, which
right?
is
I
on the
think it's a good,
horizon, but right now we don't have that for like a function health. I know
yeah,
how to
but
read that
hopefully
report.
soon.
Yeah,
Hopefully
hopefully
soon.
soon.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of feel like in a way, Function Health is trying to make it a little bit more simple by giving you that biological age readout at the end of it, right? So it's taking into consideration where all of your biomarkers are, and then it's telling you, okay, based on this, here is your final biological age. And I think
Oh, I
that
didn't know it did that.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And that's what I really like. I think that that's a good way to just kind of simplify it for people because ultimately, like, that's kind of what we care about, right? Where, you can tell someone like, oh, your HDL is too high, or like your HDL is not high enough, your LDL is too high, and those are kind of, like esoteric numbers to people where they're like, oh, well, I'm trying to do my like, my lipids, right? Or that we can give them like, hey, you are biologically 45, but your blood markers say that you're 55. That's like another like very big motivator for people where it's like, I don't want to be 55. Like I gotta figure this out. I gotta change my health. So I think that that can be a nice way to simplify things and also put things more in this context of health span, lifespan, longevity.
Yeah,
Hmm.
people get that. Do you know how they're calculating the biological age?
Yeah, they're not doing like epigenetic tests as far as I know. I think it's an
Yeah.
aggregate of like their own proprietary algorithm of like where all these biomarkers are and then how that
Okay.
leads to like overall health. I do know that the function health biological ages are sometimes very young. I think they're being very generous with people.
Damn, because I
Yeah.
Okay.
was 25 and I'm going to be
Mhm.
41 in 2 weeks.
Because I'm
Yeah.
wondering if it's like the one Dr. Morgan Levine worked on is it the phenotype age clock?
Oh, yeah. I know
Because
what
it's
you're
just blood, it's just a blood test, but yeah, same. I did it and it said I was 18. I was
yeah.
like, I'll take
A
it.
little generous, but yeah,
A
I
little
can tell
generous.
you, Renee, I can tell you what Function Health uses. Because I'm on the website, it tells you the calculations, all blood
Okay.
biomarkers, glucose, CRP, lymphocyte percentage, mean cell volume, so MCV, RBC, WBC, alkaline phosphatase.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what goes into the age.
Oh,
That
and
sounds like
albumin and creatinine.
that
Okay.
sounds like Morgan Levine. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Interesting.
would that would totally make sense, especially like what you're saying, Renee, where it's like, okay, that's very young, but as long
Yeah.
like you just have to be somewhere on the track, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just want to know
Still
that we're
good.
slowing things down a little
Right,
bit.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that's the major thing about a lot of the biological age tests, right? Is that they're not going to be very good at being transferable between each other, right? Like one age that
Right.
you're going to get from one place is going to be totally different than the one that you're going to get from the other. What you really want to track through is the changes that are happening. So like if you have some
Yeah.
kind of intervention that you're doing, you're just like, all right, even if it says I started off my biological age at 18, right? If I do something and suddenly my biological age is 22, that's like, oh, okay, red flag, something's happening
Yeah.
here. Even though I would be very
Yep.
satisfied with a biological age of 22, right?
Right. We'll still take
Yeah.
it, but we got to do something different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we're doing something wrong.
Right. Right.
Right. But you make a
Okay.
good
Very
point. I
good.
think just being consistent with the testing that you do so that you have viable information to work with. Like if you do function again. Or
Yep.
even with like glucose testing, if you're using a Dexcom, maybe always use a Dexcom. Don't switch to a finger prick or a
Yeah.
Libre.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Right. Right.
There's gonna like it's like
Yeah.
a ketone monitoring is the same way, right? It's like if you do blood ketones versus urinary ketones versus like
Oh,
breath ketones,
Breath.
totally.
totally different.
Hmm.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
sleep data. You look at your aura, your Whoop, your 8 sleep. It's like pick
No
one.
one can
Pick one.
agree.
Well, that's the funny thing. Like we're out here being like, okay, we're like really pitching brand loyalty, right? Where it's like, pick one, stick with it. Like,
Yeah.
that's your husband from now on, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No,
You
it's
can
true.
drive
Pick your
yourself
partner.
crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So,
So
Chris, I'm curious what else is kind of coming down the pipeline in terms of biomimetics. So, we talked a lot about mimicking fasting, but is there anything else cool that's coming that we
Aha,
can
yes.
mimic?
Yes, my great secrets that are going to be exposed. Yes, we are working on other things in the background as well. So, this biomimetic research platform is kind of the core of who Mimio is, what we do, and it's really about teasing out what's happening in a lot of these different states of human biology. So, the same way that we ran this process with fasting, we can also run it with exercise, sleep, meditation, cold exposure therapy, things like that. And yeah, what we're working on right now is the exercise mimetic. So I'm really, really excited about this one. We're kind of just starting the research phases of it. But that's our plan to like look at what's happening in the human body after these intense periods of exercise and find out, is there a way that we can recreate some of these, beneficial mental health effects, these beneficial muscle health effects, these beneficial heart health effects of exercise, but without actually having to like go out there and do a 15-mile marathon or, be an Olympic level bodybuilder. Help people, build, especially later in life, help people build that strength and those, beneficial metabolic flexibility effects of exercise, but without having to really, be an Olympic level athlete.
Hmm. My
that's
ears
cool.
perked up when you said cold. I'm like, ooh,
I
cold
know. I was like,
therapy and a pill? Because I'm going to keep exercising no matter what.
Oh yeah,
yeah, but
exactly.
you would keep doing cold, wouldn't you? No, Lauren?
I was
You would
more
stop?
thinking, oh, that's exciting for Renee. And, if
Yes.
I didn't have to do cold exposure, would I still? I don't know.
I mean, it's a great question. I know that I wouldn't. Like I'm a bad biohacker in that way where it's like the empowerment that I felt with fasting is not what I feel with cold exposure. With cold exposure, I'm just cold and I dislike it.
And I might die. My
Yeah,
heart
and I
might
and I
stop.
might I literally might die with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But I like these, you called them, I think, cheat codes, but they're biohacks. We're
Yeah,
making
Yeah.
the
this
ultimate biohack,
endeavor more
right?
efficient. Hmm.
Absolutely. And I think that the cool thing about all the mimetic products that we're going to put out there is that, yes, we're going to design them to provide you benefit, even if you're not doing the thing, right? You don't have to fast, you don't have to exercise, you don't have to do the cold exposure to hopefully still get these benefits, right? But then, in the same way as the fasting mimetic, they're also going to be really great enhancers to those things where we're going to be able to get you, like, if you're only running, 5 miles a day, right? Like, let me get you to what would happen during a 15-mile run, right? Or let me get you to what would happen during, a big hit training superset kind of thing that you might not otherwise experience on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
save your joints, save your adrenals. There's a lot that would, really take a hit with those more intense workouts. So,
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
people always say if they could put exercise in a bottle, it would be the number one selling medication.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
there you go.
that is a
There you go.
tall order for sure. I think, the exercise one and the fasting one, there's going to be a lot of biological complexity. And we're just going to like, we're just the ones who are starting to scratch the surface of all of that. But it's a really exciting area that no one else is in right now. We're pretty much the only, biomimetic supplement company, biomimetic research company that's making these strides. So I'm super excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does any part of you worry that like a subset of the population will see this permission to be lazy?
Yes. We're saying like same thing that happens with the fasting mimetic, right? Where it's like, we don't want this to be an excuse for people to be like, I can be super unhealthy and, just take this pill and it all goes
Yeah.
away,
Eat
right?
McDonald's and take my Mimeo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I don't
Ah,
Yeah. Please don't do that. I know our
exactly.
audience is not going to do that, but
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? Like usually we don't have to worry about it all that much because the people who like really like fasting are going to keep fasting regardless of whether or not they take Mimeo. And the people who don't aren't, and they're going to be able to use Mimeo and get these benefits. Usually what we say is, you know, I can't guarantee that Mimeo will make you healthy, but I can guarantee that Mimeo will make you healthier. And
I like
ah,
that.
that's kind of like, the big message, right? It's just kind of like we talked about before. Like if you're just, pounding hamburgers every day, you're going to be doing a lot of like negative pro feeding, pro aging stimulation. And we're just trying to like, give you a little bit of a counterbalancing edge.
Hmm.
right. Yeah, that's a good way
Yeah.
to look at it.
Yeah. We
Okay.
still have to take charge of our health journey, no matter what. No
Absolutely.
one can do that
Yeah.
for us.
Absolutely. And we'll never be able to, get rid of the caloric excess that happens, right? We can help to counterbalance those negative pathways with like the anti-inflammatory effects, the antioxidant effects, the pro longevity effects that we have there. But we're never going to be able to completely recreate fasting because we can't eliminate calories. If I knew how to eliminate calories, then I really would be, blockbuster drug.
Oh my God. Yeah. But a dangerous one, perhaps. That
Yeah,
Yeah.
that
yeah,
really opens Pandora's box for us.
for sure.
Yeah.
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 Oh,
Very
well,
cool.
Chris, this is super exciting. I don't think anyone else is talking about this in the space. So I really appreciate that you're bringing so much passion to such a exciting topic. So thank you for that.
No,
But
absolutely. I appreciate y'all.
yeah, so fun having you on. One final question for you though. Can you tell our audience one final piece of advice, something they should start doing today?
Okay, something you should start doing today. I mean, I'll be a broken record and say like, let's start trying fasting, right? If you haven't done it and you've been like curious about doing it, especially, like you can use Mimeo as a way to help make it easier with the appetite suppression effects. We hear that all the time from people where like, I just can't fast. I really didn't like doing it. I started taking Mimeo and suddenly like it just wasn't that big of a deal anymore. I could like very easily get to, 2 in the afternoon without eating because I took my Mimeo in the morning, right? Or, I was able to get to like a one meal a day schedule because I started taking Mimeo. So fasting, has all these amazing benefits. Um, and Mimeo can be just a great way to kind of like help get started within that world and like build up not only your biological efficacy for it, but also your biological tolerance for it as well.
Ooh,
Mm,
fancy.
I like
Yeah.
that.
That's
Yeah.
so awesome. And build up confidence
Yeah,
around just being empowered.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think
Very
that's
cool.
one of like, the sleeper benefits of fasting for sure. Just being able to have
Yeah.
that kind of like empowerment and control over when and where you eat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
This is so great. So, for anyone that wasn't here last time, can you tell them where to find Mimeo, where they can find more from you?
Mhm.
Anything you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find Mimio at mimiohealth.com, Mimio health.com. We're also on socials at Mimio Health. And then if you're ever interested in hearing me personally scream about nutrition into my bathroom mirror on TikTok, you can find me at that nutrition DR, that nutrition doctor.
Excellent. I love
Uh,
the location, the site specific
Oh yeah, it's
yeah.
very,
set.
very classic TikTok for sure.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I'm
cool.
gonna have to download TikTok again just for that. Get my
I
nutrition
know.
updates in the bathroom.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. This was such a blast. We really appreciate you coming back on.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all so much. Thanks for having me again. It was a really fun time.
So much fun. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. We will see you next time.